A scarred rancher must choose between burying his shameful past or losing the woman who taught him that love isn't earned through suffering. It's given freely to those brave enough to accept it. Break the sound was wrong, all wrong. Samuel Cross pressed his ear against the barn door, the rough wood grain catching on the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. 20 years of working this land, and he'd never heard his horses make sounds like that. Not fear, not pain. Something else entirely. Break whimpering, like children. The iron latch felt ice cold despite the Arizona heat, and when he lifted it, the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. His own blood. He'd bitten his tongue without realizing it. Long break. Inside the barn, shafts of dusty sunlight revealed what shouldn't be there. His prize stallion, Thunder, stood pressed against the far wall, trembling. The other horses clustered together, their eyes wide and white-rimmed. But it wasn't the horses that made Samuel's breath catch. Break, it was the smell. Roses, sweet and cloying, like the perfume Eleanor Whitmore wore to church every Sunday. Breath. But roses didn't belong in a barn that reeked of hay and leather and honest sweat. Roses meant something else entirely. Roses meant she'd been here. Long break. Samuel's scarred hand moved instinctively to his shirt pocket, where Eleanor's latest letter rested against his heart. 3 months of correspondence. 3 months of careful words and growing hope. 3 months of believing that maybe, just maybe, a woman like her could see past the ruin of his face to the man beneath. But Eleanor Whitmore didn't visit barns. Eleanor Whitmore didn't leave her scent lingering in places where decent women feared to tread. Long break. Unless she wasn't the woman he thought she was. Thunder nickered softly, a sound that cut through Samuel's confusion like a blade. The stallion's eyes weren't fixed on him, but on something behind him. Breath. Something that made the animal's powerful frame shake with terror. Samuel turned slowly, his hand moving to the colt at his hip. Break. The barn door stood open, empty, but carved into the wooden frame, fresh enough that wood shavings still clung to the letters, was a message that made his blood run cold. She knows what you did. Sunset. Come alone. Breath. The carving was deep, professional, made with a tool sharper than any knife Samuel owned. He ran his finger along the grooves, feeling the precision of each cut. Whoever had done this knew their way around wood, knew their way around his property, knew things about him that no one in Redemption Creek should know. She knows what you did. Break. Samuel's reflection stared back at him from Thunder's water trough, the scar that bisected his face like a lightning bolt across a storm-dark sky. 20 years since the fire. 20 years since the night that had changed everything. 20 years of carrying a secret that could destroy more than just his own life. Long break. But Eleanor couldn't know. No one in Redemption Creek knew. He'd made sure of that when he'd bought the ranch under a different name, when he'd built his new life on the ashes of his old one. Samuel Cross had been born in that fire, and the man he'd been before had died in it, hadn't he? Break. The rose scent lingered, but now Samuel caught something else underneath it, something familiar, that made his stomach clench with recognition. Smoke. Not the clean smoke of a cooking fire or a forge, but the acrid, chemical smell of burning things that weren't meant to burn. Break. Like the smell that had filled his nostrils the night he'd earned his scar. Samuel followed the scent trail out of the barn, across the yard where he'd spent countless evenings watching Eleanor's house in the distance, its windows glowing like beacons of hope. The trail led to the old well behind his cabin, the one he'd boarded up years ago, because the water had turned bitter. The boards had been pried away. Long break. Samuel peered into the darkness below, and his heart stopped. There, maybe 20 feet down, Something glinted in the afternoon light, something that shouldn't exist, something he'd thrown into a different well, in a different state, 20 years ago. Breath, a silver locket, heart-shaped, engraved with initials that belonged to a dead woman, Mr. Mary Reeves, the woman whose death had driven him from his old life, and into this new one, the woman whose murder he'd been blamed for, even though his hands had never touched her in violence, the woman whose real killer had never been found, until now. Breath. Samuel's hands shook as he lowered a rope into the well. The locket came up easily, as if it had been placed there recently, as if someone wanted him to find it. The silver was tarnished but intact, and when he opened it, Mary's face smiled back at him with the same gentle expression he remembered. But there was something else inside the locket now, something that hadn't been there 20 years ago. A photograph, recent, of Eleanor Whitmore standing in front of the Redemption Creek Church, her hand resting on the arm of a man Samuel didn't recognize, a man whose face was turned away from the camera, but whose build and bearing seemed familiar. Break. On the back of the photograph, in Eleanor's careful handwriting, some secrets refuse to stay buried, some debts must be paid. Tonight, the Redemption Creek General Store held more than supplies and gossip. In the back room, where Jeremiah Walsh kept his private stock of whiskey and his collection of old newspapers, Samuel found what he was looking for. Fire destroys Reeves Mansion, suspect still at large. Long break. The headline was 20 years old, but the words still had the power to make Samuel's hands shake. The article told the story he remembered, the mysterious fire that had consumed the Reeves estate outside Denver, the discovery of Mary Reeves' body in the ruins, the manhunt for her supposed lover, who had vanished the same night. But there were details in the article that Samuel had forgotten, details that now seemed important. Break. Miss Reeves was reportedly engaged to marry Denver businessman Marcus Whitmore. Breath. Though the engagement had not been formally announced, Mr. Whitmore was traveling on business at the time of the fire, and has offered a substantial reward for information leading to the capture of the suspected killer. Whitmore, Eleanor's surname. Break. Samuel's mind raced through the implications. Eleanor had never mentioned family in Denver, had never spoken of any connection to his past, but the coincidence was too great to ignore, and Samuel had learned long ago that coincidences were usually anything but finding what you're looking for. Long break. Samuel spun around to find Jeremiah Walsh standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The old storekeeper had been in Redemption Creek longer than anyone, had seen settlers come and go. Breath. Had watched the town grow from a way station to a community. Just reading old news, Samuel said, folding the newspaper carefully. Break. Funny thing about old news, Jeremiah mused, moving closer. Sometimes it has a way of becoming new again. He paused, studying Samuel's scarred face with eyes that seemed to see too much, especially when certain people start asking questions. What kind of questions? Break. The kind that a pretty young woman might ask about a man's past, about where he came from, about why he chose to settle in a place like Redemption Creek. Jeremiah's smile was thin as winter ice. The kind of questions that might make a man nervous, if he had something to hide. Samuel felt the weight of the locket in his pocket, the photograph that connected Eleanor to his past in ways he was only beginning to understand. Has someone been asking questions about me? Long break. Not someone, Jeremiah corrected. Someone's Miss Eleanor, of course, but also a gentleman from Denver, well-dressed fellow, expensive horse, the kind of man who's used to getting what he wants. Break. The description matched the figure in the photograph, the man whose face had been turned away from the camera. Samuel's blood ran cold as the pieces began to fall into place. Break. When was this gentleman here? Breath. 3 days ago, same day Miss Eleanor received that telegram from back east. Jeremiah's eyes glittered with the satisfaction of a man who knew secrets. Funny how things work out, isn't it? A woman gets news from her past, and suddenly a stranger shows up asking about yours. Long break. Samuel left the store with more questions than answers. But one thing was becoming clear. His past hadn't stayed buried as deeply as he'd hoped. Breath. Someone had found him. Someone who knew the truth about Mary Reeves' death. Someone who was using Eleanor to draw him out. But why, and what did they want? Long break. The answer, Samuel suspected, would be waiting for him at sunset. Sheriff Tom Bradley had been Samuel's friend for 15 years. They'd shared whiskey and stories, had worked together to keep Redemption Creek safe from rustlers and drifters. Breath. Bradley was an honest man in a profession that didn't always reward honesty, and Samuel had trusted him with more than most. Long break. But the man who met Samuel outside the jailhouse wasn't the same one who'd shared Christmas dinner at Samuel's table just 3 months ago. Break. Sam. Bradley's voice was carefully neutral. Heard you've been asking questions around town, just trying to understand some things that don't make sense. Samuel kept his own voice level, but his hand rested casually near his gun, like why someone would leave a message carved into my barn door. Bradley's eyes flickered with something that might have been guilt. What kind of message? Break. Samuel described the carving, watching Bradley's face for any sign of recognition. He found it in the slight tightening around the sheriff's eyes, the way his hand moved unconsciously to his badge. Break. Sounds like someone's playing games, Bradley said finally. Probably just kids. Long break. Kids don't carve that deep. Kids don't know about things that happened 20 years ago in Denver. The words hung between them like smoke. Breath. Bradley was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond Samuel's shoulder. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd been carrying secrets too long. Break. Sam, there are things about this town that you don't understand, things that go back further than your time here. What kind of things? Breath. The kind that keep good people safe and bad people buried. Bradley's hand moved to his gun, not drawing, but making his position clear. Sometimes a man's past needs to stay in the past, even if it means making hard choices in the present. Samuel felt the familiar chill of betrayal, the same feeling he'd experienced 20 years ago, when friends had turned into accusers overnight. You know who I really am. Break. I've known since the day you rode into town, knew about the fire, about Mary Reeves, about the manhunt. Bradley's smile was sad and tired. I also knew you didn't kill her. Break. The admission hit Samuel like a physical blow. Then why? Because the man who did kill her has been very generous to this town over the years. Very generous to people who help him keep his secrets buried. Bradley's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And very dangerous to people who don't. Long break. Samuel's mind raced through the implications. Marcus Whitmore. Bradley nodded slowly. He's been looking for you for 20 years, Sam. Not to clear your name, to make sure you never get the chance to clear it yourself. And Eleanor, Long break, is his niece, and his bait. Bradley's expression was genuinely regretful. I'm sorry, Sam. I truly am. But some fights can't be won, and some prices are too high to pay. Break. Samuel felt the world shifting beneath his feet, the careful life he'd built crumbling like sand. Eleanor's letters, her smiles, her gentle words, all of it had been a lie, a trap 20 years in the making. What happens now? Long break. Bradley's hand tightened on his gun. Now you ride out of town, tonight, never come back. In exchange Whitmore forgets you exist. And if I don't, then tomorrow morning the good people of Redemption Creek will find your body in your barn, victim of a tragic accident. Bradley's voice was steady, but Samuel could see the pain in his eyes. I won't enjoy it, Sam, but I'll do it. Samuel looked at his friend, his former friend, and saw the truth written in every line of his face. Bradley would pull that trigger if he had to. would sacrifice one man to protect a town full of them. Long break. How long do I have? Until sunset. Whitmore wants to see you first, wants to explain things. Samuel nodded slowly, his mind already working through possibilities. Where? The old mine shaft, north of town. Break. Bradley holstered his weapon, the gesture somehow more final than drawing it had been. Sam, for what it's worth, I wish things could be different. So do I, Tom, so do I. The abandoned mine shaft north of Redemption Creek had been played out for a decade, its tunnels dark and dangerous, but as Samuel approached on horseback, he could see light flickering in the depths. Someone was waiting. Long break. The entrance was larger than he remembered, wide enough for a man to walk upright. The wooden supports looked newer than they should, reinforced recently. Someone had been using this place for more than storage. Samuel left his horse tied to a scrub oak, and approached on foot, his Colt loose in its holster. The light came from deeper in the tunnel, accompanied by voices. Two people, talking in low tones. Told you he'd come. Samuel Cross never could resist playing the hero. Long break. The voice was cultured, educated, Eastern. It belonged to a man Samuel had never met, but had been running from for 20 years. He's not the same man who left Denver, Uncle Marcus. 20 years changes people. Breath, Eleanor's voice, but different somehow, harder, more calculating than the gentle woman who'd written him letters full of hope and possibility. Long break. Samuel crept closer, using the tunnel walls for cover. The light came from a natural chamber about 50 feet in, where the miners had followed a vein of silver that had ultimately disappointed them. Now it served a different purpose. Breath. The chamber had been converted into a kind of office. A desk, chairs, filing cabinets, maps covered one wall, showing property boundaries throughout the territory. Red pins marked specific locations, including one that Samuel recognized as his own ranch. Long break. Marcus Whitmore stood with his back to the tunnel entrance, a tall man in expensive clothes that looked out of place in the rough surroundings. Eleanor sat at the desk, sorting through papers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Break. 20 years I've been building this network, Whitmore was saying. 20 years of careful investments, strategic partnerships, patient planning, and all of it threatened by one man who should have died in that fire. He didn't kill Mary, Eleanor said without looking up from her papers. We both know that. Break. Of course he didn't. I killed Mary. Whitmore's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. She was going to expose my business practices to her father's newspaper friends. Couldn't allow that. Breath. Samuel's blood turned to ice. The casual admission of murder, spoken so easily after 20 years of lies. But Samuel Cross was convenient. Whitmore continued. A drifter with no family, no connections, perfect to take the blame, while I consolidated my holdings and moved west. And now? Long break. Now he's inconvenient again. His ranch sits on the largest silver deposit in the territory. I need that land, and I need him gone. Whitmore turned, and Samuel got his first clear look at the man who'd destroyed his life. He was older than Samuel had expected, probably in his 60s now, but his eyes were sharp and cold, the eyes of a man who'd never let conscience interfere with profit. Break. The question is whether we do this the easy way, or the hard way, Whitmore said. Breath. Eleanor finally looked up from her papers. He won't sell, not to you, not once he knows who you are. Then we'll have to be more persuasive. Break. Samuel had heard enough. He stepped into the chamber, his gun drawn but not aimed. Not yet. Persuasive how? Breath. Both Whitmore and Eleanor spun toward him, but their reactions were different. Whitmore reached for a gun that wasn't there. Eleanor simply looked sad.
Samuel, she said softly, I was hoping you wouldn't come. Were you? Samuel kept his voice level, but inside he was dying. The woman he'd fallen in love with through her letters, the woman he'd dared to hope might accept him despite his scars. She'd been playing a role all along, It's complicated, Eleanor said. No, Samuel replied. It's simple. You're a liar, he's a murderer, and I'm the fool who believed in something that was never real. Whitmore laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, but it was real, Mr. Cross. Eleanor's feelings for you are quite genuine. That's what makes this so deliciously ironic. Samuel's eyes flicked to Eleanor, searching for confirmation or denial. He found neither, just a woman who looked as trapped as he felt. Explain. My dear niece was supposed to seduce you, gain your trust, convince you to sell your ranch, and disappear quietly into the sunset. Whitmore's smile was cruel. Instead, she fell in love with you. Quite inconvenient, really. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. I never meant for it to happen, but it did happen, Whitmore continued. Which is why we're here, in this charming little office, discussing alternatives. Samuel felt the pieces clicking into place. You're going to kill me, and make it look like an accident. Oh no, much more elegant than that. Whitmore gestured to the papers on the desk. You're going to sign over your ranch, to Eleanor. A romantic gesture from a man who's decided to start fresh somewhere else. Very touching, really. And if I don't? Whitmore's smile widened. Then the good people of Redemption Creek will learn some very interesting things about their beloved Samuel Cross, about the fire in Denver, about poor Mary Reeves, about the manhunt that's still technically active. Samuel looked at Eleanor, trying to read the truth in her eyes. Is that what you want? My ranch? I want you to live, she said simply, even if it means I never see you again. The papers on the desk told a story of careful planning and patient greed. Property deeds, survey maps, mining reports. Whitmore hadn't just been hunting Samuel for revenge. He'd been building an empire, and Samuel's ranch was the keystone that would complete it. Quite impressive, isn't it? Whitmore said, following Samuel's gaze. 20 years of work, dozens of properties acquired through various means, some purchased legitimately. Others, well, let's say the previous owners were persuaded to sell. Samuel studied the maps more closely. Red pins marked properties throughout the territory. But there was a pattern to them, a line of holdings that followed the mountain ridges, where silver and gold were most likely to be found. You've been doing this for 20 years, stealing land, murdering people who got in your way. I prefer to think of it as aggressive business practices, Whitmore replied. The territory is growing, Mr. Cross. Statehood is coming. The men who control the resources when that happens will control the future, and the men who don't. Whitmore shrugged. History is written by the victors. Samuel looked at Eleanor, who had remained silent during this exchange. Her face was pale, her hands clenched in her lap. Whatever role she'd played in this scheme, it was clear she'd never expected it to go this far. What about you? Samuel asked her. Do you believe in your uncle's vision of the future? Eleanor met his eyes for the first time since he'd entered the chamber. I believe in survival. I believe in protecting the people I care about, even if it means destroying them. Even if it means saving them from themselves. The words hung in the air like smoke. Samuel understood now why Eleanor looked so trapped. She was caught between loyalty to her family and feelings she'd never expected to develop, between the safety of compliance and the danger of resistance. There's a third option, Samuel said quietly. Whitmore laughed. I'm listening. You let me walk away. Tonight, I disappear, just like you want, but I keep my ranch. Impossible. I need that land. Then you'll have to take it from someone else. Samuel's hand moved closer to his gun. Because I'm not signing anything. The tension in the chamber ratcheted up like a tightening wire. Whitmore's eyes flicked to something behind Samuel, and too late, Samuel realized his mistake. Sheriff Bradley stepped out of the shadows, his gun already drawn. Sorry, Sam. I told you some fights can't be won. Samuel found himself caught between two guns, with Eleanor sitting frozen at the desk. The chamber suddenly felt much smaller, the walls pressing in like a tomb. "Now then," Whitmore said, his voice regaining its confident tone. "Let's discuss this like civilized men. You sign the papers, you ride out of town, and everyone lives to see another sunrise. And if I don't, then Sheriff Bradley will be forced to arrest you for the murder of Mary Reeves, a crime for which you'll undoubtedly hang." Whitmore's smile was cold as winter. "Of course you might try to resist arrest. Tragic, really, when a desperate man forces a lawman to defend himself." Samuel looked at Bradley, searching for any sign of the friend he'd known for 15 years. He found only a man who'd made his choice, and was prepared to live with the consequences. "Tom, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Bradley's voice was steady, but Samuel could see the pain in his eyes. "I've got a town full of people depending on me to keep them safe. I won't sacrifice all of them for one man, even if that man is my friend." Samuel understood. In Bradley's position, he might have made the same choice, might have decided that the greater good outweighed individual justice, but understanding didn't make it hurt any less. "Eleanor," Samuel said, turning to the woman who'd captured his heart with carefully crafted lies, "what do you choose?" She looked up at him, and for a moment he saw past the deception to something real, something that might have been love, if circumstances had been different. "I choose you," she said quietly, "even if it destroys everything else." Eleanor's words changed everything. Whitmore's confident expression faltered, and Bradley's gun wavered slightly. In that moment of uncertainty, Samuel saw his chance. "Eleanor, don't," Whitmore began, but Eleanor was already moving. She swept the oil lamp from the desk, sending it crashing against the chamber wall. Flames spread quickly across the papers and maps, 20 years of careful planning going up in smoke. "You little fool." Whitmore lunged for the burning documents, trying to salvage what he could. Samuel used the distraction to dive behind the desk, drawing his Colt as he moved. Bradley's shot went wide, the bullet sparking off the stone wall, where Samuel's head had been a moment before. "Tom, don't make me do this," Samuel called out, hoping his old friend would see reason. "Can't let you leave, Sam. Too many people depending on me." Another shot, closer this time. Samuel could hear Eleanor moving somewhere in the smoke-filled chamber, but he couldn't see her. The flames were spreading, fed by the dry papers and wooden furniture. "The tunnel's going to collapse." Eleanor's voice, sharp with fear. "The support beams are catching fire." She was right. Samuel could hear the ominous creaking of stressed wood, could see the orange glow reflecting off the tunnel walls. They had minutes, maybe less, before the whole chamber came down. "Whitmore," Samuel shouted, "call off your dog or we all die in here." But Whitmore was beyond reason, frantically trying to beat out the flames with his bare hands. 20 years of work was burning, and with it, his dreams of empire. Bradley appeared through the smoke, his gun trained on Samuel's position. "I'm sorry, Sam, I truly am." Samuel saw the sheriff's finger tighten on the trigger, and knew he was out of time, out of choices, out of everything except the truth. "Tom, he killed Mary Reeves." Whitmore admitted it. "I heard him." Bradley hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. "What, 20 years ago in Denver, Whitmore killed his own fiancée, and framed me for it. I've been running from a crime I didn't commit." "He's lying," Whitmore snarled, abandoning his futile fight against the flames. "Don't listen to him." But Samuel could see doubt creeping into Bradley's eyes. The sheriff was an honest man, and honest men recognize truth when they heard it. "Ask him," Samuel pressed. "Ask him why he really wants my ranch. Ask him about the other properties he's stolen. Ask him about the people who've died."